It's not just defenders of democracy here at home who worry about another Trump presidency. There are similar concerns overseas. According to the New York Times, the prospect of Trump in the Oval Office is almost too upsetting to even think about for most European governments. That's especially true in Germany, a country that was often on the receiving end of Trump's diatribes. Diplomats are particularly concerned about international alliances, the future of NATO, and the war in Ukraine if the Republican frontrunner returns to the White House. Joining us now, former CIA officer Mark Polymeropoulos. He's an MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst. Also with us, MSNBC host Ayman Mohyeldin to talk about this as well. Mark, can you expound upon the concerns there are overseas, especially among diplomats serving abroad, but also NATO members, about what would happen if Trump were to come back into the White House?
Sure, Mika, and I think the New York Times article really got it right. I mean, when I talk to my old colleagues, across the pond, there is this almost, collective European freakout over a Trump too. And why is that? And that's because alliances really matter. Since World War II, the United States, and really was a brilliant national security strategy, built this incredible constellation of partners in Europe and Asia. This is in the political field, the military economic field, and my old field, the intelligence field. And let me kind of expand a bit about that, because that means intelligence sharing. So if you're a German government official, if you're in France, or if you're in the United Kingdom, what they do when they collect intelligence is they shared it with the United States. They did so knowing they could trust us. And this doesn't, of course, apply to other Republican candidates. This is just Donald Trump, who can't handle classified information well, and of course is seen as pro-Russian. And so why would the British or the French, if they have critical information on Russia, why would they ever share this with us now? And I think the fear is they're going to just turn this spigot off. That's something that worries me as a former intelligence official, and certainly is of concern to our European partners.
And of course, and fascinating the context of the war in Ukraine, where most people believe that Vladimir Putin is waiting out the American election to see if Donald Trump is put back into the White House. Then he's got a buddy, and he can kind of go with impunity through Ukraine, and perhaps some of that support will be rolled back. So the focus in this Times piece, of course, is Europe, but this is a global question for sure.
It is a global question for sure. I think if you look at where the Republican Party is today, you see how far Trump has moved the Republican Party. I mean, when you have people like Vivek Ramaswamy basically saying, we're going to concede territory to Russia, and hey, I'm going to pick up the phone and tell Putin I want to break this alliance up between you and Russia, you and China, and he thinks it's going to happen that easily. It just gives you a sense of where this Republican Party, which was once known for standing up to the Soviet Union, which was this pro-democracy, we're going to stand up for human rights, Ronald Reagan-esque type of national security posture, where they are. You've got Trump, who's buddies with Vladimir Putin. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, who wants to concede territory. And you've got others who, like Kevin McCarthy in the Republican Party, who are just not as tough on Russia as they once were. And so all of that you can attribute to Donald Trump in the 4 years that he was in office, and how much he's changed the dialogue about Europe, about European security, and Russia.
I mean, and as you lay that out, I talk to a lot of leaders in Africa, of African countries, and Russia and China has made a lot of moves in terms of trying to affect African policy, work closely with African leaders, even what's going on in Nigeria. And the rumblings are that, well, there's not a lot of opposition to Russia or China, then what is the concern about what we do? Talk about the ramifications this has globally when there seems to be this kind of ambiguity in terms of U.S. policy.
Yeah, and we kind of knew what Donald Trump thought about Africa and some of the comments that he made about African countries being asshole countries. And I think that kind of summed up the Donald Trump presidency foreign policy towards Africa. And to his credit, Joe Biden has been way more engaged with Africa. They've had African Leaders Summit here in the United States in Washington.
A big one.
A big one, a very big one. And so it gives you a sense of how much the United States under President Biden has re-engaged with Africa, because to your point, we are playing catch up. For the last several years, China has certainly moved into Africa with heavy investments in countries. Russia, through its proxy organizations, like the Wagner Group and the mines, they've exploited that. And in doing so have contributed to the destabilization of some of these African countries because the U.S. has not been present in the 4 years of Donald Trump. Now we're starting to see that kind of change a little bit. But to the wider question, you also have countries in the Middle East who are looking at this particular presidency of Joe Biden and hoping who are the countries that are looking for Trump? It's the authoritarians. It's the strongmen that want to welcome back a Trump presidency because they knew with a strongman in the United States, this kind of authoritarian, they had somebody that spoke their language, somebody that they can trade with in this kind of like quid pro quo kind of transaction, not necessarily about values or human rights or interests, but more about what can I give you, what can you give me?
Well, and Mark, let's talk about that and actually the damage that I still note traveling across the globe that Donald Trump has caused. Where more authoritarian nations and more authoritarian leaders will say, Trump understood us much better. I mean, you look at what he said to President Xi about the concentration camp, saying that was fine at Mar-a-Lago, but also now you're starting to hear, and I didn't hear this 10 years ago. People going, we're tired of the United States lecturing us. It's much easier to deal with China. And it comes, even Germany. We have Germany, and you look at the German officials being concerned, of course, in large part because of how horribly Donald Trump treated German leaders, but also, as you know, the far right-wing party there, sort of a almost neo-Nazi party, is really gaining strength in Germany, and they're looking to Donald Trump and saying that part of their inspiration comes from Donald Trump, a guy who, of course, attacks Western democratic leaders, but praises President Xi, praises Vladimir Putin, praises Kim Jong-un, talks about love letters to Kim Jong-un. Again, this is sending a very clear message to people in the West who may also, who do have the same autocratic leanings as Donald Trump.
That's right, Joe. I think there is a danger. In Europe, the only leader who would kind of welcome a return of Trump would be Orban in Hungary. America does stand for something in terms of our economic and political values. And the problem with a Trump 2 is that you are once again celebrating fascism and autocracy and really a pro-Russian sentiment. I think about what a foreign intelligence service, a leadership profile of Donald Trump would look like, and that's what it would say. And that is certainly not the message that the United States since World War II has really put forth to the world. And so I think there is certainly, and of course, there's growing right-wing movements, as you noted, all over Europe. And a Donald Trump 2 presidency certainly would exacerbate that. So the world watches us. I think that one thing that would be remarkable if there ever could be any kind of data is how many actually, Europeans will actually watch the debate tonight. I think a lot of them will.
All right, MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst Mark Polymeropoulos, thank you. And Ayman Mohyeldin, thank you as well.
I think